Yes, all staff.
Okay, then I will call to order this committee of the whole for Tuesday, January 31st. And in honor of the Liwat rule, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Liwat Nation. Following members are attending in person: myself, Councillor Ted Craddock, Councillor Katrina Nightingale, and Councillor Laura Ramsden. Councillor Jenny Helmer is attending the meeting electronically. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and being recorded. The recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Craddock, second by Councillor Ramsden. Opposed? Motion carries. We'll right to the main event. Number 3, the introduction to the 2023 budget. Thomas, the floor is yours when you're ready.
Great, thank you very much.
If we could just check to make sure that Jenny, or Councillor Helmer, are you able to see the
Yep.
report?
Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thomas, do you mind if I just say a few
Please.
words to set the stage before we start? So I just want to commend Thomas and the finance team, as well as all of the members of the Office of the CAO, in coming together to start to formulate a new and what I see as a very sophisticated process this year. One of the things that is changing or has changed with this process is that Thomas has brought to us a bottoms-up approach to budgeting. And this is something in my many years as an executive director I espoused and believed in. It helped me to deliver very accurate budgeting year over year, and something that was recognized during my time in my previous role. And so in our conversations about the delivery of budget this year, I was really appreciative of him taking this direction in order to help us build a budget that I believe is more accurate. You learned through this process that bottoms-up budgeting has much greater precision to it than typical budget practices. I also want to say that it's more effective because the departments who are involved in spending the monies and planning have a direct hand in contributing to what the end looks like. We also see that there's a better use of the resources distributed across the organization through a bottoms-up approach. And it really means that, and you'll see this through the presentation, that there is an alignment of strategic objectives and goals that occurs through using a bottoms-up approach. And then finally, I just want to say that it is my belief this also improves the level of transparency and the accountability, because each one of those individuals who helps to plan the bottoms-up budget has a direct relationship in that and hand in that. And as they go throughout the year, feels more ownership over the budgets that have been created. So with that, Thomas, take it away.
Great, thanks very much. And big turnout today. I think that's a testament. There's 2 behind us and lots online. I think that's just a testament to all of the engagement and work that everyone's been doing to develop the budget. Staff have really taken the ownership of it, and I think that's really been the objective all along. So as we establish the principles for developing the budget, a lot of this is what Elizabeth just said, but I think something I tried to impress upon our budget owners to really focus on service delivery and setting measurable targets. So we understand with council's input what type of service we're trying to deliver to the community and provide something that the end result of some of the feedback today in the budget cycle will be able to translate that into focused budgets that we'll do a little bit of work. We'll figure out what it costs and where we need to reallocate resources or adjust accordingly, come back with something that would ultimately result in the cost of the budget. Cost efficiency was really a big mandate, and I think the bottoms up approach really achieves that. Instead of starting at a baseline of what we spent last year and figuring out where to go from there, the real request that we've had to kick off our discussions has been, how do you achieve what you're looking for? Do you need to approach it differently, the same, receiving quotes from vendors and really understanding the cost of that service has been what a lot of the work thus far has been and will continue to be over the coming months. That to me really helps address some of the pressures we're facing with CPI increases, additional pressures. And I'll get to a little detail around what we're experiencing in the Pemberton market in a little bit, just so you kind of have visibility on what everyone's seeing at the ground level. But again, I really think it's so important that we try to manage costs very critically. And as Elizabeth said much more neatly than I will, like, budget ownership and transparency is such a benefit of this approach, where with everyone developing and owning and being able to be involved in the end-to-end cycle, that accountability is really so important and a result of this process as well. So that will achieve better results through the year in terms of delivery of an effective budget. I've prepared this here visual to really highlight the 2023 major themes. I think this to me was really important because what it does is it translates a lot of what council and staff have worked on with establishing some priorities, and it's interpreted that in a way that staff can use this to understand objectives and translate that into a benchmark or a measure of whether it fits those goals. As many of these organizational health, smart growth, the environment, emergency preparedness, reconciliation, regional transit, and flood mitigation shouldn't be surprises. I think when I worked with our team to evaluate where the real overlap sits, it's around service excellence, and that's toward the community. So the outside box, where the 90% of activity and a lot of the budgeting revolves around, it's delivering service to make Pemberton healthy and safe and a beautiful community. That captures a lot of the budgeting philosophy, but these very focused objectives, I think, are very, very important to guide the direction as well. So with these considered, I just wanted to highlight where we're going today. What we will do is I'll give a little bit of an overview of how we organize the budget. With new council, I wanted to take the opportunity to just make sure that we've established what our departments are, how we organize, where some of the funding comes from, cover off a little bit about BC assessment and some tax rates, kind of the overview. But then we'll go through those service objectives that we've worked on with staff, with our managers. And there I'd like to seek your input on strategic direction, where we'll focus, where staff should be focusing some of our attention, direction, inputs on service levels and so forth. So that's really where it's really important that we get the input. And then I'll cover off just a bit of a transition through where we were last year with reserves and the next session, which is a really, really important one. Your city, the consultancy, Corey and Paul that helped us out with asset management. We'll be going over some of the great work they did and essentially what some of the future looks like in terms of planning with reserves and financial management. So I thought it was a really good foundation to make sure council is well equipped with an understanding of where we are going into our next sessions as well.
So just before we move on, so each of these four areas have actually been attached to the manager's look at the budget.
It's a lens with which managers can look through it. So these were the themes, some of the large themes that came out of some of the strategic planning. And this is just a way that I've tried to ground some of the discussions in terms of looking whether objectives or changes would meet these directions, which we've already received. And it's not to say that these are the only ones, but these seem to be some of the larger themes.
Thank you.
Great. So at a very, I guess, mechanical or organized objective, I just wanted to highlight what services and areas are funded and how we organize our budget. So we organize it to a variety of different departments and objectives, and those include public works and parks, fire services, development services, governance, administration and financial services, airport, water, sewer, transit, and then we've of course got a lot of capital projects and reserve objectives as well. And I must admit, I love Whistler does something similar to this, but it really breaks down how our funding model works. And importantly, in municipal government, you can't run a deficit, meaning you can't spend more than you're taking in. We've got to set aside some savings, essentially reserve contributions and so forth. But generally, or to simplify the equation, revenue is generated principally through property taxes and user fees and some non-tax revenue, and that can either fund operations, so day-to-day services, or it can fund essentially savings or reserves, some of which would be set aside through reserve contributions for the future or through capital projects as well. The nuts and bolts of it, there are many different distinct objectives in terms of where funds can go. Examples would be general or water or sewer, and many are subject to a lot of restrictions. There's a lot of partnerships with some of the neighbors through regional district or various models that we have to consider and apply here when balancing the budget. But I wanted to just highlight that at a very high level, so that is kind of brought up.
I'll probably have a lot of
Please.
very basic questions, but what's the breakdown of the revenue in roughly in percentages?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I can circulate to council a breakdown of last
I'm
year's.
just curious.
One thing we always do, and I should know this off the top of my head, but when we send out our property tax notices for our July deadline, we send a couple of pie charts to everyone with exactly that. So I'll circulate that after.
I think last year's 36.
And then the other two would be,
And they're in the regional district.
but
No, she's talking.
I'm talking about the three things. What's the percentage breakdown of property user and non-taxable?
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
I was just curious.
I'll pull that up and send that around.
The user fees apply to certain services, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The fees apply to water and sewer.
Yeah.
And so we'll have water and sewer rates that pay for that service.
Yeah.
And then so depending on reserves and expenses, those water rates are
Yeah,
established,
influence.
property taxes.
Yeah.
So when we look at property taxes, this is an area that often we get a lot of questions around, and I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to a couple of really great resources. In our public session, I'd love to do the same, but on BC Assessments page, we really highlight, I wanted to highlight a couple of things that the assessed value has already been sent around and circulated. Those that own a property will have received that already, and those are set based on July 1st values. Where input from this team will really have an influence is not on that. That's done independently, but it's around setting the property tax rate. So this is the rate which sometimes you'll hear the mill rate across 9 property classes that would be applied across the rate per $1,000. So the calculation below shows how the property taxes are derived. And as an example, if the property tax rate was 4.57 across a $500,000 assessed value property, that collection would be just under $2,300. So I just wanted to show that linear formula, but importantly, the resources are there if anyone wants to explore that as well. And one of the other questions that comes up is, so what happens with taxes? Are they going up or are they going down? The answer is it depends. And the relative position of the assessed value relative to the average change in the property taxes is where that answer would be derived. So if, for example, a property's value change is lower than the average change for a property class, taxes would likely decrease. And the opposite relationship would hold if, say, a property value the change has been higher than the average for the property class, taxes would likely increase. That one, there's actually some really great resources on the website below too. So that link I'd recommend anyone to explore.
Can you pause on that one, Thomas? Does everybody get that? Because that's a really key thing that people get confused in town and here. So basically, pardon me, there's an average of what our assessments go up and that we get. So if you're above that average, so if your property is $1 million and it goes up 20% and the average is 10%, then your property values will go up. If your property is $1 million and it goes up 5%, still went up in value, but it's probably going to go down because it's less than the average. That makes sense?
Not quite, because my understanding from the previous slide is, okay, for an example, let's say a home is worth $1 million now. That's what the property assessed value is. You have the mill rate of 4.75. That would give you, X percentage. So the next year, if your property value went up by 20%, so it's now 1.2 million, if that's right. If we didn't change the mill rate, I mean, your property taxes would still go up, or what you're saying here with where we're looking at the relative change is that is what's going to tell us whether or not we tweak the.
So if we did a 0% increase, let's just make that the assumption, we do a 0% increase, that million, and let's say, keep it really round numbers, the average assessment went up 10%.
Yeah.
Okay. We're not doing a tax increase. If your property went up 20%, then your taxes will be going up because you're above that average of 10%. If your property assessment only went up 5%, because we didn't do a tax increase, you're gonna end up paying less.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense? Which is rare. Very rarely assessments go down, but they go down at different rates. Like last year, I noticed, you compare to other people in town, and last year a townhouse jumped huge for assessment. This year so the assessments tend to change a little bit, but that's the important thing, because some people go, whoa, holy shit, my property went up X amount of dollars. That means my taxes are going to go up. It's not a direct correlation. It depends on that relative. That makes sense?
Kind of. I probably have to, and maybe at one point I could look at a spreadsheet that I work better when I can actually see the number.
And I think what might be helpful in what we've historically done that I want to do in one of our future sessions is just show a few examples. Typically we'll pick a house or a condo on Laburnum and a couple of different examples and show what some relative increases look like. And that might provide a little more context too.
Yeah, that would be great.
And to make it more complicated, there's increases to our assessment. In other words, new taxation that's come in, new properties that have come on board. So there's that. And so we got what you call market change and non-market change. And I'm sure Thomas will take us through, but the point is that all factors in to the fact that it's not a direct correlation. The assessment goes up, taxes go up equally. There's all these other factors that we end up including. And by the time our awesome staff take us through the process, we'll be able to break it back down to, okay, here's what we would consider for a tax increase. This is what it would look like at $1 million home and $2 million home.
Yeah, give us an idea.
So we're setting the foundation. We'll go through that.
So
Get excited for the next 2 or 3 months of this, and by the end, we'll all be experts. Great. So I wanted to highlight a little bit of what we're observing around British Columbia and most specifically around Pemberton. A lot of the feedback from staff and what we're observing when we're reviewing our contracts are showing some pretty specific trends. But recently released, we just saw the British Columbia Consumer Price Index of 6.6% higher unadjusted than in the year before. So the basket of goods that make up the CPI year over year went up 6.6%. Not precisely, but in simplified terms, that's what often people link to inflation or call inflation. So that's a measure which shows up in a lot of guidance, a lot of past council resolutions, and is often used as a benchmark or something that is considered through cost of living adjustments. It's a factor that contributes to the way council would have historically looked at that. So I highlight that to say that it's gone up from last year's 3.9. What we're seeing in practice is that 6.6, that's single digits. We're seeing double digit pressures from some of our vendors. Some of our larger contractors are showing double digit cost increases in requests. And a lot of those are really amplified by geography. What I mean by that is we're getting fuel charges tacked on and we're seeing a lot of higher costs. A lot of different citations as to why that is, whether it be labor or materials or supply chain, but it's been a real cost. And staff has been really diligent and disciplined in challenging these contracts, trying to renegotiate through our procurement policy, retendering bids, and trying to defer any of this impact or mitigate it. So I highlight that because there's some costs that I want to say are essentially unavoidable for some of our core services, and we're trying to maintain that cost discipline and efficiency. One discrete area we're seeing this most pronounced is some of our larger capital items. These are some of the longer lead items. Some of our larger apparatus for fire as an example, and some of our infrastructure, our buildings. So this is really challenging, and it's something that we're really focusing on as an opportunity to still get the same service. But the challenge, and this is something we'll see in the upcoming presentation, is a lot of the infrastructure on Pemberton is aging. And with aging infrastructure, there's increased maintenance costs, and you can only defer work so long or mitigate some of the risk. But there is ultimately a requirement to replenish reserves and fund and look out for the future. So there's a delicate balance there that we need to think about as well. Another significant change and challenge, and why this showed up as an organizational major theme is our organizational health and some of the labor that we've seen. Village of Pemberton has experienced a turnover rate of 25% in 2022 and 35% in 2021. So we've seen a very significant cost to the organization through this turnover. One of the few benefits of this, though, is large recruitment expenses. We don't expect those to be encouraged at the same rate as we've seen in the last few years. And the way to achieve that, though, and sustain it and grow is through targeted investment and retention, and anticipated turnover should happen provided that attention and investment is there. So this is where we'll look for a little direction in a few minutes, but just wanted to really highlight this. And to kind of ground where we are with this, a couple of key initiatives that have already been developed and staff is working on already is reestablishing and refining a compensation philosophy to ensure that the Pemberton is competitive in the labor market. That involves stating a pay policy position. A retention strategy is a key area of attention, and really targeted investment in training, development, and succession planning is another key area of focus here. This is where the bottoms up process is really shining to really help prioritize where that training sits. Examples would be some of the regulatory areas, fire and rescue, see a lot of that, a lot of certifications and operational requirements. And another key area is development and growth. There's a lot of new staff, many of which are new to this type of work or environment and municipal or governance work, and that investment is an area of prioritization. And then where some of these areas are being prioritized, one of the additional pressures that we wouldn't have seen over the last 2 or 3 budget cycles is some of the return to in-person service. So there's more hybrid models over the last few years. Conferences, training, development has really seen a large reduction because it hasn't been available or people haven't been able to travel. But that is something that we're seeing as well. So on to the really good part. This is, I think, where we're really excited to get your input. I think we have a few staff on the phone as well. And then of course we've got Chief Adams and also Mr. McCrae behind as well. And I'd welcome anyone to ask clarifying questions, feedback too. But what I'll do is I'll go through these service objectives, and I'd really value council's input and strategic direction the real end goal here is to take your input and incorporate that into our budgets. And where there may be many that the view of council might be that service levels are great and we're meeting the objectives, there may be some that require significant change. So where there, I'll give an example, and we'll get to this one toward the end, but suppose council wanted to ask staff to provide some input around or prepare some change around the airport and snow clearing mandates, for example. If the direction was that the level of service needed to increase, we'd be able to incorporate that and come back with some impact on what that would look like. So we can explore some of these objectives, and I think it will come together as we go through them a little more clearly. But these are really strategic level discussions where one point that I would make as well is that as Pemberton grows, we'd like to be able to measure and assess how these service levels are doing. So having measurable KPIs is something that's a big part of developing this process with managers. We can establish whether the streets are all cleared on time and whether as we have increased operating hours or growth related to development, say, we'll be able to continue to use these principles to deliver service. But again, I think it will make more sense as we explore some of these. So I'd love to start with the administration and financial services. So we've got 4 service level objectives, and with a higher arching view of vision, the first objective is to deliver strategic priorities, corporate objectives, and employee values. Second is around organizational health, and there's a focus on retention and increased organizational stability and development. The third is around service and providing reliable, responsive, and building relationships. And then the fourth service level objective is around delivering emergency preparedness.
Under the organization of health, you have professional development. Is that part of what you're calling organizing stability and development?
Precisely. So as I talked about a moment ago, where there's some targeted investment in training and development and succession planning, what staff has been doing is building out some risk ranked training and development goals, where it's line item detail, evaluating priorities, and essentially prioritizing those through the year and establishing a forward-looking view as well that would allow for the next couple of years of training and development as well.
For building some redundancy and so that there's more than one person in the organization trained for a specific role and that sort of thing.
In many cases, and like it would depend on management's or on departmental management objectives, but yeah, in many cases that's exactly what it is.
In terms of service, so you just talked a couple minutes ago about, in the context of growth, coming up with, you use the term KPIs, which I'm not sure, but it's some sort of measurement metric. So I was just wondering, in terms of service, is that like or maybe that's part of vision, is building those systems so that they are, if we're trying to figure out, how we're doing well, but the ability to measure and track that is obviously incredibly important. So I just wondering if developing those systems and maintaining those systems is part of the under admin and financial services. So I would assume that is something that we'd want to focus on to make sure that we have those systems in place.
For sure. And I think a lot of that is, so for example, with retention and increased stability and development, like we would certainly expect that our by investing in potentially allocating more funds and focusing on organizational health, we would expect that our turnover will decrease below the 35 and 25%. So we'll expect and be able to measure the impact of that as well, by focusing on these areas, some of which don't carry a significant cash costs. It's time investment as well. But for the purpose of budget, obviously it's bottom line that we're looking at. But again, the focus here as we're laying out will be, increase investment and retention strategies. So, right now we're working with a consultant as an example to finalize some of these mechanisms to develop the pay policy and so forth, all of which could be measured in the end.
Okay. And then could I ask another question? I've just no way saying that I disagree with these four, but I was just wondering if my understanding of the process is that there's been discussions and these are kind of the objectives that staff is currently has come forward with. And I was just wondering what, if there was any other objectives that were considered or that.
Those four objectives were sort of the emerging themes from our strategic
Okay.
planning. That's where those come from.
Okay, perfect.
So staff have tried to use those four that came from that to just sort of lay over our approach to the budget to see how things fit within that.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yes, that's great.
And some of these we're not going to see big changes or necessarily big inputs. For example, the next one, governance services, the service level objectives. These ones are kind of boring. They're to support administration of elected officials and for planning and development of onboarding council. So this is where council's remuneration is budgeted and where we put in training and organize the basics to make sure that everyone's equipped and can read agendas. So to simplify, but it is kind of a boring one that is running pretty lean. You'll see all the nuts and bolts of it in the next sessions. But again, if there's significant inputs or changes that you'd like to see done way differently, this is a great opportunity for us not to spin our wheels with where we've been. But I've kind of modeled that out and I'm working through that too.
Can I ask you a question
Sure.
about governance services? So for number 2, I see that it says development of onboarding of council. So that to me, the way it currently reads is kind of it's stressing, okay, when, council first starts, but would there be, I guess, like ongoing training of council? Because I'm assuming, not a lot is going to change in 4-year periods, but if there's, materials that come out or as development.
There's the occasional, there's standard, some of the standard costs for council will be BCN.
Yeah.
They don't want to attend LMLGA. And then there will be the occasional, if something catches the interest of council, or sometimes I'll forward to you guys something that's come to me via email. That is a specific leadership conference on something. Could be a digital one, like online, and there's a registration fee, so if council's ever interested in that sort of thing, then that all kind of falls, so we, to your point, the onboarding, like some of the costs that we incurred in the first few months, that won't be recurring, but there still are some other costs that could come up.
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
I really like your question because it does frame exactly what we're trying to do. I think it is, in an ongoing nature that will allow us to present a budget and a 5-year plan that does take that view of something that's a little more strategic. So I'll tidy that up. And I think what we can do is make sure the visibility is there in the budget and try to be happy with that planning. I think you're thinking about exactly and asking the question that is really important. And that one may not be as material of a move in terms of the budget dollars.
Yeah.
But if you ask that question for clarification or direction on another one, that's exactly what we're after. So thank you.
Yeah, because it was just all I was thinking is just in terms of training, because if I recall correctly, when we were talking in strategic planning, a big point of discussion or one of the topics of discussion was, how to make sure that council, so governance and operations are operating efficiently, basically. And so I was just thinking, obviously onboarding is really important with that, but at least to my mind, like I'm still developing a fulsome understanding of what it means to be in governance versus operations. And so I could see that that's kind of an ongoing learning process. So,
Mhm.
Oh, and I, Sheena may speak to this as well, but, you know, we recognize that this is a long, process, similar to with staff. And I think that if you step back and sort of look at these objectives from the standpoint of, continuous improvement, you'll see how that's reflected in the way that these are written. But I would also say too, that, through our HR training matrix, council has been included in terms of your continuing development through your time. Okay, here.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, there are, obviously there's sort of training sessions that are affiliated with LMLGA and UPCM where you can actually sign up and there might be an extra cost for that, but it happens during your time there.
Yes.
So you can take advantage of those training programs. There are also other training programs that, as Mayor Richmond noted, we might get notification about, and that will often come to council. And with that, and anybody want to go, and then a resolution's passed to send somebody or other to that. We don't always know what those are going to look like in a year. Some years are more robust with those kind of opportunities than others. And certainly over the last few years, we've seen a lot of online type of webinars happening. I think that kind of stuff will continue, and there's not a lot of cost to them, which is often they're free, or if it's a webinar, it's like $200 or something like that. But what we've done traditionally is if we get an official letter about a program, we bring it to council, and council decides who wants to go and who wants to do it, and then it gets added in. It's just hard to predict what that's going to look like. But, yeah. But yeah, your training, in essence, your training is not limited to your local government leadership academy next week.
No, it's just that you're encouraging us to keep learning. It's our professional development too.
You gotta be in the role 2 years before you really understand it.
2, 3.
Excellent. Thank you. And again, I look back at this major themes chart where organizational health is a priority, and I think this is an example where we can apply that direction to make the linkage between where some of the targeted investment is sitting. Next up is fire services. The three overarching objectives, service level objectives, are around the preservation of life and property within the Pemberton area, to promote fire safety, deliver education programs, and invest in health, well-being, and training of firefighters, and the effective maintenance and investing in apparatus and equipment. I hope she's doing a wonderful job in developing an apparatus and long-term capital plan that highlights some of the trucks which are approaching their 30-year end of life, with some regulatory implications. He's highlighting a lot of that and developing a plan that should be quite robust, and we'll see the view of that in one of the next sessions. And there's been a lot of success in the Fire Smart program too, which is of great service to the community. So been very successful in grant funding applications there to date, and those are some of the bigger themes while responding to all the calls. They do an amazing job.
So Thomas, or all of you, with regards to like bottom-up budget approach here, you know, recognizing that we need to plan for a new fire hall and then backing up the governance municipal hall after that. Are you building? Are you baking into the budget some money reserved towards those eventual projects, or is that going to be like, is that on the bottom or is that coming on the top?
Well, that's the best part. That's at the end, and I highlight where we've been, and then actually our next session, the guys will provide some perspective on where some of our gaps are. So I don't want to provide a spoiler, but I think I did highlight last year that we haven't invested enough in reserves and in preparing for all that, and that's where some of my recommendations will sit. Of course,
we'll see that.
we want your direction on that too. But I think Corey and Paul do a wonderful job really breaking some of that down with a different lens of looking at the same thing too. Development services, the three big service level objectives that Mr. McRae's team have provided are around providing an effective building permit and development application processing, meeting policy requirements around growth and development, and enabling open access to land use information for all users. I don't know if you have anything that you'd specifically like to add, but as an example around service levels, I think a lot of the really effective work that's been developed so far this year is just around allocating a very efficient use of contractors and staff and being able to scale a lot of that service to activity that the team is seeing. I think that's been a real area of expected cost savings when we've been working through the budget.
Yeah, through the chair, I mean, just quickly run through those and maybe I'll give an example of each so we can, as an illustration of how we got to these. So number one, there really is one of the core activities, really there's two core activities for development services. Number one is probably the most public facing. So really we came to the conclusion of running an effective process is really the key to what we do here. We don't want to see surprises. We don't want to see missing information. We don't want to see late hits to projects, you know, whether you're building a shed or developing some land within the village, all those things can just cause issues when, if the process was more effective, it would have been a smoother ride for everyone. So really we're measuring that one in terms of, you know, how many times does that happen in a year? How many times is there a late hit or a surprise on a project? Number two, meet policy requirements around growth and development. The number one, so that's, you know, how will we measure that? Knowing, are we meeting all our legislative policy requirements? And so the OCP is an example of that. You know, we're just pushing beyond the recommended sort of lifespan of an OCP, and so we're addressing that now. So I would say we're meeting this policy objective in that way. And then number three is really about just bringing up staff and making the most use of all the information we have. So investing in ways to make access to what land use information and everything that's tied to it more streamlined and frictionless. So if that's someone, the finance department needing to look up a roll number or access the assessment from a year ago, whatever, we want to make sure that information is very easy to access. It doesn't require staff time to answer simple requests.
And would that be, if I might, would that be under education for the local community? So that you don't have to basically take a person's time up, that there'd be a place that we can look on the website to find out a lot of those questions they have?
Mm-hmm. To the chair, exactly. So if a member of the public could look up the zoning of a particular parcel or something like that without having to phone the village or email the village and require a staff member to go and find that information for them, we'll see huge savings in terms of effort and labor there.
Thank you.
Scott, and feel free, Thomas, if you come, we'll talk about this later. But with regards to that, the processing, government application processing, the province recognizing that that's part of one of the issues towards the housing crisis is trying to support community to help, speed up their own application processing time and support that, as well as other tools. Have you guys explored that? Is there possible revenues or support for that aspect for Ronnie coming from the province?
Yeah, to the chair, yes. We are aware of some projects and grant opportunities that existed a few years, maybe a year before I joined the team, to help exactly what you're addressing. So help local governments improve their application process and making sure they're getting the right information at the right time available. In my opinion, this is all work that we can do in-house. I don't see it as a huge expense to do this. It's that we need to be, sharpen our pencils ourselves and keep, a big part of this is maintaining the process. Someone can hand you a really nice process, but if no one's using it or no one's keeping it up, it's not going to provide the value you'd like. So versus if you have a bit of a bottoms up process developed that everyone's bought into and is using all the time, I find that's way more effective.
Mm-hmm. So some of the support from the province is also like tools and IT, and I've seen some recent announcements on that as well. Just flagging it.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm just not sure if it's a wordsmithing thing or it's just embedded in the language, but for number 2, meet policy requirements around growth and development, is that within that, is it just understood that that would assume sustainability? Is that meet policy requirements around growth and development and sustainability? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure if I'm just wordsmithing here or.
Good charity, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, what I provided Mr. Sikora with was actually about 3 times as long.
Oh, okay.
It's a very good
Right.
job of story to get
Yeah,
back to it.
Like, you know what I mean? I'm not, yeah.
Yeah, and I think sustainability shows up in a few different areas of the budget as well. So yeah, I mean, I think that was probably included in the first draft, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. I guess I'm just wondering, is that assumption made that the word sustainable is embedded in the word growth and development?
In my mind, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
The one other answer or thing that I would highlight for the first question that was raised was around staff resourcing. I think what we saw last year was we were successful in partial grant funding of an additional position through the summer students grant. Probably got the name of the grant specifics incorrect, but that would be an example of allocating service levels. So if, say, as an illustrative example, council was like, we'd like to increase the speed of our processing significantly, that would be the type of thing that we could go explore and bring back through the budget process. So I just really want to make sure that this is an opportunity to share that feedback where we can evaluate and you know, I'm very confident that Scott here has provided a lot of thought and rigor into how to achieve this and is highlighting it very well, but this is an opportunity to really steer that strategic direction as well.
So to be clear, I recognize that our development term application process is faster than any in the corridor and beyond. So it wasn't a question of, or just to be clear, that I would like to see sped up or anything like that. I just know that there's some resources out there that could be available.
Yeah, we're always interested in seeing what's available at the province.
And again, I just saw an announcement like a few weeks ago about that, saying, you know, we're supporting municipalities with tools they need to. I didn't dig into it, but yeah, but you guys are doing a great job.
So sorry, just to clarify, because I know we're going through all these service level objectives. So I was assuming, but I just want to make sure at one point will we also be talking, like you guys will be coming forward and saying, okay, well, this is objective number 1, but just for example, we would like to see it, so, you know, we've looked at it and we would, you know, we've identified a gap here, or like, will you also be giving us that information? Because I know you said you're looking for our feedback, but it's just, you know, number 1, if I have no idea how fast we're processing permits, I can't, you know, so I just double checking that we will be getting that information at one.
Yeah, it'll be incorporated in. What you'll see is you will see a budget broken down that highlights where all these where all of these expenses lie, and I think the translation or the questions around changing those, I think, are something that we'll be able to measure over time as well. So we haven't historically identified these objectives as to how we organize our budgets, but it's a bit of a multi-year process in terms of developing. Here's a baseline of what we're trying to measure, and then being able to measure it over time and targeting and adjusting investments over time. And it is abstract to begin with as well. Like we have, there are a lot of measures that we can provide and reference as well, but we're developing more to be able to measure, control them further.
Okay, so just to clarify, so at this point, you're just looking in terms of, you're laying out right now the service level objectives, and you're just looking for our feedback kind of high level as to, okay.
We're at 40,000 feet today,
Yeah.
and we're going to come back with like 10,000. We'll try to stay out of the, you know, below the floor because we really want to be in the governance and strategic direction. We don't want to be looking at very detailed programs, painting schedules and so forth. We want to be focused on the way that we can serve the community and shift or prioritize resources.
Definitely went from the general to the more specific.
Yeah, no,
We're going to get.
yeah,
It's open soil, like you give an input at every level, whether it's a general statement about, hey, in general, if you did have a thought about application processing, you make that general statement now, or as they take us through the process and we look at, you know, let's say public works and at that point you go, well, I'd like to see things mowed faster, or, okay, well, now what does that look like? Right, and that would be added in, so we'll get a little more specific as. Go ahead, Jenny.
Thanks. Good conversation, and I really like the approach that's being taken. I just wanted to comment, follow up on Katrina's comment there. Because it is at 40,000 feet, it seems that, you know, the language we use is really important because, you know, we're trying to portray the service level objectives so broadly. And so removing the word sustainability or some reference to where we know there's a large interest, especially when it comes to development, I feel is really important to make sure that that language is crafted. Because as you say, it's not about the 5,000 foot and below, it really is that high level piece. And so, you know, how we phrase that at that level, I think is so important. And the pressures that we get and, you know, when we look at what our responsibilities are backwards around development, one of the biggest pieces is, you know, adhering to whatever that looks like, but that is a sustainable piece. So I do worry that that word is not in there if this is going out as a leading document at 40,000 feet.
Okay. Just to kind of follow Councillor Helmer. Yeah, just because, again, going back to the strategic planning, I think we had talked about kind of an environmental lens on everything as well as reconciliation, that idea. But I did see at the beginning, or that Venn diagram that you have. So I'm just wondering if, you know, Scott's comment earlier, you know, to his mind, sustainable is built into this idea of growth and development. And I just kind of echo is, and maybe it's covered by the Venn diagram, but making sure that maybe the like reconciliation and sustainability is kind of permeates. It seems like that was a major priority for us as a council, and just making sure that you know, that language permeates, and it may be sufficient that it's in the Venn diagram and doesn't need to go into the individual ones, but if we can just kind of get clarity or confirmation that that's the case.
Yeah, I think those are excellent points, and I think so we can figure out how to get that language and update that and include it. But what I think is also really important too, that makes up the content of the budget, the 803 line items that you'll see and have lots of questions about. What we'll see is we can incorporate and help bring council through where that investment would be around sustainability and the other factors as well. But you know, as a guiding principle, we can draw that linkage, and I can take the action to update that language. We'll post something and make sure that resonates a little more clearly for the next sessions too.
Well, one of the things that I'm looking at with development services, and then your next highlight is transit, is the amount of development, the loss of parking, and the lack of transit. That's a concern for me, because I don't want to slow development down because we need places for people to live. But at the same time, a lot of projects are coming to us and even want half the amount of parking available. And we've got, basically, as far as I'm concerned, we have no transit. If you get on the bus in the morning, it's full, you gotta wait. Sometimes you can't get on even after that. And now they've got a new bus stop halfway between here and Whistler, so that means those people can't get on. So I've got a feeling there that the last little bit, when I look at the amount of projects that McCrae's got on his book there, and trying to balance those. Again, I'm not the person to slow things down, because people have zoning in place, they deserve to go ahead. But we're really lacking in that transit area to be able to look at the parking issues and how we're moving people.
And I think that it's so important that you bring that up, because I think that's exactly what we're trying to achieve and going through the process and getting council's perspective on what you feel are the most crucial areas that you want to support here. So Thomas will talk about this in a little more detail with regards to transit, but certainly, we're experiencing some pressures from varying directions. One being, a reduction of support from one of our partners, as well as, what we are experiencing to be a dramatic increase in, the need in coming back from, the pandemic. And, as you say, buses that are full, people getting left behind. We're certainly wearing that on the ground. And so this is one of those places and spaces in which council has the ability to say, make this a priority in this budget.
Yeah, and supporting that, we talk a lot about, we're obviously been talking a lot about affordable housing, but it's our low income and middle income people that are most vulnerable when it comes to transit. They go together, the two things, and I think it's a huge priority, the regional transit. Yeah.
The one comment just on parking too is, again, the regional transit, it's no question that's incredibly important. I think also too is just maybe, this has been my perception moving forward. Once hopefully, we have a regional transit system in place. Also recognizing that, that's for daily commute, but I mean, most people who live here for the lifestyle and its ability to go mountain biking or, to take up off of Forest Service Road and go and, go hiking and everything like that. And so I guess in my mind is having that regional transit system is important, but I don't think that that is necessarily ever going to replace, people are still going to want vehicles because regional transit is not going to get you up the Hurley and a lot of people are going to continue to want vehicles. So in my mind, it's just also thinking about that parking is, I think that is a great idea, is that, or an important part of when we plan for growth and development is making sure that we recognize that even with regional transit, we may not see people necessarily we may not see a drastic decrease in the amount of vehicles. I don't know. Hopefully, ideally, less people are using the cars as regularly, but. Yeah.
I would counter that. What you will see is instead of needing two vehicles, you'll need one.
Yeah, that's actually true.
So the more transit you have, the more you can walk to get your groceries, the more we connect with active transportation. In my mind, plan for all those things. You're right. We still live out here and you can't put your snowmobile on the bus. So people are going to want their vehicles and all that, but we're still very much attached more so obviously than an urban area. However, my optimistic view is that we supply strong transit and we connect our neighborhoods in other ways, then hopefully we take away at least one of the family vehicles. So that's when we start to look at our requirements for development going, okay, this is what we've already been faced with, and we'll see what Councillor Caddick's referencing, we'll see again with other applications going, well, this style of development attracts this demographic that with a good transit system place won't need quite the same requirement that you folks have for parking requirements. And that's when we get into a great conversation about it in redevelopment, which is fine, we have to, but that's when we look at it and go, does it make sense? Do we have the transit in place to actually accommodate it? What other measures? Is there shuttle? Is there shared vehicles? Are there shared bicycles? What other ways can we do it so that people are reducing at least some of their dependence on vehicles?
And I hadn't actually thought about that in terms of going from two cars to one car. And definitely.
Yeah, I think it's the behavior change that needs to happen, and all the opportunities we can provide for that to happen. To what you're speaking to is, I think, needs to be a very top priority of this council.
Yeah, sorry, and I just want to be very clear, like regional transit, based on all the discussions, is very much a top priority. It was just like, what I was thinking about is, long-term, once we have that, it's also how we think about parking, but yeah. Very clear on the record, right? Very much.
Why don't we track them, Laura? Laura needs transit.
I think I have to thank you. This is incredibly helpful because I might have jumped the gun on the service objectives, highlighting the anticipated expectation that given what we're hearing about focus on the environment, the impact of the car and commuting, that this would be a priority. So I think what we can start to translate into the budget is what increased service would look like. We'll obviously work with BC Transit and with our partners in the local service as well. I think as was mentioned, the decrease in funding from one of the partners is definitely putting additional pressure on both the Village of Pemberton and our other partner in this space, but providing some visibility around what this looks like and how we can achieve those goals, I think is key here, because it is that service level objective that we're trying to hit here.
And I think also dealing with Whistler. We're trying to get them on board with helping funding the transit. I think that's really important. We've talked about that over the last council, maybe two. And at one point, I think one of the CEOs actually was somewhat feeling maybe that's a thought. I'll never say that they were in favor of it, but there was certainly a thought. I think we have to look at that, and I know it's hard when zoning is already in place to go to a developer and say, look, busing is the main issue. If you're not willing to contribute to busing, maybe you have to have the full parking. So I think those issues all come down.
The hard thing with developers contributing to transit is that it's operational, it's ongoing operational funds that are needed, not as much, you know, we try to get developers to, especially on the regional district, to supply, you know, allowances for transit, be it transit hubs or pullouts or whatever it is, ongoing maintenance. Yeah, that's another one, but just one of the directions out of the transit committee last year was to engage the RMOW in conversation regarding that, so it is on. CO Chase.
I wanted to also ask just for a little more clarification around some of the parking. So some council is new and may not have been here for the announcements or familiar, but last year the village was successful in receiving funding for the regional multimodal transportation hub. So that's one over $1.8 million from the Rural and Northern Communities Infrastructure Program. A bus parking in an area where there's very efficient bus service that'll be built coming up. Is it in addition to that? I just want to clarify that I'm fully understanding where we should be focusing on some of the parking.
I think we need to, because what I don't want to see is that multimodal hub become basically overflow parking for buildings that we've allowed a reduction in parking.
Okay.
Because last year, I know I live in the Glen, and last year in the Glen, I came to staff a couple of times because the amount of vehicles that were parked in there full time, the people didn't live there. I know where they were living. So I don't want to see that. I don't want to see pressure on other areas of town. But I also want to make sure that 52 units we're putting in there is for people using busing, not an overflow parking area for buildings that we're reducing parking by.
Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful clarification. I think it helps frame the relationship between development and the way we look at the transit budget as well. So thank you for that.
I think there is also
Oh, no, just to the end of the transit conversation, I think that we are at a really excellent point to engage with BC Transit about what options would be in cost for service level changes if we have direction and interest from council in that way.
And it was pretty huge cost when we had approached them, was that a year ago or so? Mayor, it was,
I can't remember the exact figure.
it was in the six digits.
Yeah, it was like 168, I think.
Yes.
This is the number I got in my head, but yeah, to be discussed for sure.
Excellent. Thank you. That's very helpful direction and bring something back. Next up, a couple of Mr. Chima's areas of or of management, public works and parks, water service and sewer services. There's a real focus around a safe and healthy community. So around public works. Oh, there it is.
You're on.
Is focused around accessible roads and sidewalks. Providing good value for public spaces for our community to enjoy and creating pride through maintenance of municipal spaces. For water services, and so sorry, just to kind of cover that, we're not proposing or incorporating any major service level changes. It would just scale with growth of the community and some of the non-market change and so forth that we explored earlier would contribute and support. Water services, the service level objectives are around safe drinking water and reliable capacity for fire protection services. Security and protection of the existing water source and sustainable supply. So investing in a new source. As we think about some of our major themes in strategic planning, a lot of the discussion is around the forward-looking view in water resources and ensuring adequate preparation to support smart growth in the community. And around sewer services, safe wastewater disposal, safe treatment and environmental disposal, and reliable and a trustworthy system. This is one of the most important areas. I'm not an expert, but Mr. Chima can speak. One of the most important areas of operations that you don't see that happens behind the scenes. But there's a lot of work that it takes to make sure that it's running. And
well, essentially our goal is to for you to not know how it works because you'd see mess or your sewage would back up. So yeah, I mean, when we look at our objectives as a department, and Thomas mentioned it a few times there, but I think about the safety and the health of the community as being the number one, and that covers water and sewer. But also, if you go into roads and trails and parks, I think it's safety is obviously important. Potholes, the road needs to be safe to get from point A to B. You got to fix the roads, but also, you know, even the parks, our health is important, like mental health, being out in public spaces. Of course, that all has environmental impacts as well. So that was sort of the theme for these three departments, was this safe and healthy community, because I think it all kind of ties together.
And under that, did we take into account the addition, what we're doing at Dundas Park and how we're going to continue to build out there and stacking levels, and maybe because of that and sandstone and everything out there, I'm not knowing for sure, but it almost looks like it's a full-time position, just looking after that end of the community. Will that be in your budget
Absolutely.
presentation?
So I mean, that's a tricky one, because that's partly funded through recreation, which obviously is in the PBIS approval, but we have already a position built in for another parks worker that their primary focus would be in that park and taking care of the recreation facilities. So that would be funded through both recreation and parks. But yeah, that and equipment needs out there as well. I've identified a few things.
Storage and.
Well, that would be, we have a grant for the amenity building, and we would be building in storage facilities for that sort of maintenance area. But yeah, all of that factored in.
My general statement on public works and public spaces would be that your crew does an amazing job keeping the town looking great. My sense is that takes a lot of effort with the staff that you have to get it done. So an extension of what Ted was saying there, you know, I certainly wouldn't be here. I'm not sitting here asking for an increase in service levels. I think honestly that it looks great in town, summer and winter clearing. But I guess it would just be that keeping up with all the growth that he's referring to as well, not just in that area, but I just want to make sure you guys are resourced to, you set yourselves a high standard. I want to make sure you're resourced to maintain that standard.
Yeah, so I think that what we've prepared in the budget should, as Thomas said, our aim is to just keep the service level the same as it is. not increase our service level. But in order to do that, we're definitely going to need to increase capacity and like staff capacity and equipment. And we'll see that both in our snow clearing operations and in our summer parks. And I mean, one area we talk about parks a lot and the snow clearing, you know, cutting the grass is something that has to happen every week or so, clearing the snow every time it snows. But there's a lot of areas, you know, just as we're taking on more of the sunstone development, for example, if you spent much time up there, there's a lot of drainage corridors up there, service corridors that we've been doing walks through, and there's already trees this big growing in the service corridors that need to be cleared. So, you know, for example, one thing that I'd like to do, just to not to get too into the specifics, but just to give an example, is I'd like to get a brusher attachment for our new excavator. And that was always kind of the thought when we got that excavator. We could do our own brushing for these service corridors to keep the growth back, for example, in these important service corridors that have been built. So that subdivision alone, it's maybe not a full-time job all year round, but there's definitely 6 weeks of the summer that we're going to have to devote an operator and equipment towards, or contract that work out, which would have much more significant budget impact. So one of the things that we've been looking at with our budget is, where do you know, could you add a position, or do we just budget $20,000 to pay a contractor to do this work? And I see more value in, you know, if it's a fifth of that position covering that, you know, that's how we've been analyzing these decisions. And I think that when you factor in the snow clearing and then the other work that needs to go on, I think it makes sense to have more positions, for example, people taking on this work, and then also having the equipment to be able to do it.
Yeah. Katrina, did you have anything?
Sort of. Yeah, I was just thinking about, you know, when we had the conversation around the Great Lawn and just the sort of back and forth that went on around that. And I was just wondering how that, it was the statement proving, I think it's providing good value for public spaces for our community to enjoy, because I agree. I think you guys do an amazing job of making everything look beautiful for the community. But if I'm coming from 40,000 feet, I'm just wondering in there, does there need to be anything around the protection of or is that not the protection of those spaces? Or because you know how we got into all the conversation around moving the play thing to the Great Lawn, and that's to avoid that sort of thing, you know what I mean? Because that seemed to take up a lot of time that maybe might not have been necessary.
I'm trying to see how that relates to budget though.
Well, we're going to be adding more money because it's going to cost more, because we're going to be we've had to go back and revisit the Great Lawn, right? And moving that play structure, which is costing money. So,
and I agree. And I'm not pushing back. I'm just trying to figure out where you're going.
Like,
so that's a cost that we're incurring because of we'll call it a change order.
yeah.
But how would you consider factoring that into a budget, looking at like, how does that?
Well, how do we avoid that by, you know what I mean? How do we avoid that from happening?
I think that specific example is related mainly to a project in the daycare project.
Yeah.
We identified this need, and council identified the need that we need daycare. There's our place for it, and that means that the playground is not going to have to move. That's a quite complicated one, because the playground was actually built when that service with recreation was the SLRD. So, you know, that whole thing, I think that's the result of much more complicated case. In terms of our budgeting for parks, we're talking more about taking care of what we have. And so I think any improvements to parks, for example, let's say we decided we wanted to put a playground in Pioneer Park here, which is a similar space, green space that isn't, that maybe council would feel that they don't want to add amenities or take away from that green space. That would be more like a capital budget item that we would put forward as we want to improve this park. I think the nature play one was more of we need a daycare. Oh, that means that has to move and that. So I think it's more difficult to budget for something like that.
I was thinking just more efficiency, avoiding that, and if that can somehow be embedded in that language, but I get what you're saying.
But
Yeah,
I think
right.
for this anyways, this is more around our operating budget,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
wouldn't really be
It would be-
the capital improvements anyways.
Right, that's what, yeah.
But I think for sure, obviously, our objectives include maintaining, sorry, I don't know these sentences off by heart. I know that we had a very good conversation about it, but
Yeah.
the safe and healthy community, the create pride for the maintenance of municipal spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the very general description of a lengthy discussion, again, similar to Scott's comments, that we basically we didn't want to miss that
Yeah,
not only are we making sure that the roads and sidewalks are safe and that people enjoy the space, but that, you know, there's this same level of, wow, it's a beautiful community. And that's one of the most feedback that we get is the green spaces and
Mhm.
even the streetscape spaces that we do have landscaping on are generally received quite positively.
great.
And going forward, and I'm looking ahead, 5-year budget, maybe further. Is there some thinking about water reduction by irrigation and maybe as much as we want the green spaces? Finding a way to balance the two?
Absolutely. That's, I mean, as you probably know, on all of our new park projects, especially Dundalk Park, that's always been an element that we've tried to include. And that's an interesting one because it does have a bit of a crossover on parks, public works and water. For example, our downtown enhancement project involves this whole rain recapture system that irrigates all of that new landscaping with captured rainwater. So that's an element that we're definitely including in any future designs. And I guess it's not explicitly captured there, but I think the sustainable supply, like we say, investing into a new source, but also the very first one, reliable capacity as well. I mean, that talks about fire protection services, but part of that is reducing our, I'll call it useless waste of you know, watering grass that then evaporates, and we're using our drinking water. You guys have heard me talk a lot about this, but absolutely, that's a top priority for.
And I guess, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Laura.
You actually.
Go ahead, Laura.
Okay. Two questions, Bob. Let's just start with the first one. For speaking of water services, so it's just during the strategic planning, there was conversation about, I mean, similar to what Councillor Craddock is discussing is sustainable use of water. And there was talk about, you know, trying to run education programs. So it's not only about maybe making sure that we increase our capacity of water to deal with our growth, but also see about, you know, hopefully reducing our per capita usage. And so I was just wondering within the budget, if there had been any thought towards or any allocation towards, you know, education programs or discussions around that.
Yeah, we've actually already included that in our line items and communication. So we've taken that feedback, and that's an example of how this is a great forum to make sure we got it. And yeah, we've incorporated that into the advertising communications GLs for both water and sewer as a top priority.
Yeah, and I think number 2 for the water services there, security and protection of existing source, that was part of that.
Okay.
As well as your question, just making what we have go a lot further, right?
I guess if I might, the follow-up thing I would have, and this goes to development services and water. With the project that we're looking at on the Hero Road, their suggestion is what they're gonna build in as an underground tank to retain some of the water and eventually move it off. So the question I had, then why aren't they using that for irrigation purposes rather than just putting it into the Yarn Canal later on? So those kind of issues I'd like to see thought about, because if we are putting 1,000-gallon tank in the ground to put runoff in, why isn't it being used for irrigation? Instead of putting it in the Yarn Canal and using treated water for it. So those are things that come to my mind sometimes too, is how do we protect our water, our treated water, and how can we use storage rather than just like we did downtown.
Mm-hmm. And that is, you're right, in development, that's one of my most common suggestions on the development referrals that we get is, do they have some sort of irrigation reclaim Because as you said, a lot of times stormwater needs to be retained. Why not use it for irrigation? Of course, that depends on seasonal. We can have droughts and then there's not enough, but so they usually need both systems, but any reduction is positive.
Thank you.
Just a question on the public works and parks, and it kind of overlap with development is because what I understand from previous conversations is that new developments, there's the possibility that, even if they're single family dwelling homes, it might be strata property, which smaller roads and in some of the communities means that if I understand this correctly, the stratas are responsible for snow clearing. So it would, that takes pressure off some of the services for the municipality, but I'm just wondering if within the planning, do we plan for, I guess, is looking at the budget and looking at the 5-year budget, do we plan with the idea that potentially some of these developments might not actually end up being strata and that increase, for snow clearing, for example, because that's such a big part of what we do is building in that capacity, I guess.
So strata subdivision compared to bare land, compared to standard subdivision, that would start at the very preliminary stages of the discussions. So it's not like something can be developed and then it's planned to be a strata and then at the last moment they sort of say, oh, this is actually going to be public, because it's all built into the framework of the subdivision process. So there's a lot that's very complex process, but Scott, you might want to weigh in, but essentially there's reasons why a subdivision would be strata and there's reasons that it wouldn't be. It's not always the answer to just make everything strata so that we don't have to deal with it, because first of all, if you want that land to be accessed to lands beyond, for example, that's one of the issues we have with Tayada being a strata is that we can't, that's not a public road, so people can't go through the connected highway. The municipal services, whether it's water, mains, sewer. So there's lots of different factors at play, but I think your question was asking if a development becomes public property and we're not budgeting for that increase in capacity. I don't think that would really happen because the development process is quite lengthy and we would have those discussions. And the idea is that, it usually takes quite some time for them to get built, and usually the developer has to pay these capital costs, which is the more substantial ones. And then we usually have time to clean up after. And that's kind of what we're in right now with Sunstone. As I mentioned, we're starting to see, this is now what we, you don't get like a maintenance manual for a subdivision, but obviously they're designed to function a certain way. And we're starting to build our planned maintenance activities on these new subdivisions, and it's definitely significant. So you're right that when these developments come through, we definitely need to think ahead as to, there's this many kilometers of road and this many, and that's another thing that we're working on. I know you talked a little bit about KPIs and performance indicators. So that's one thing that we're kind of looking at is figuring out just in general, based on per meter of road that gets built and per meter of ditch and per meter of this, like what should we be budgeting for as we go forward and we take the mass as well.
That's really our smart growth theme, and we're incorporating those operating costs as we can in planning for the future. It's all right, I'll keep moving. This is one that's perhaps going to receive a little more, hopefully we're going to get a little more feedback if we need to look at changing any service levels, but the airport. I framed these with our airport manager in terms of looking at where we are, but obviously there may be some feedback as to if we need to change anything. So maintaining a safe and secure airport is certainly a top service objective. Periodic snow clearing and routine maintenance. There's some contractual complexities as to precisely what this means, but essentially our operations staff does endeavors to maintain the airport to be open as much as possible. And there are times where the snow would fall several feet, where there's priorities around servicing other parts of the community where there's some competing priorities and not enough resources. This one I bring to your attention for the reason that we've also seen quotes of upwards of $100,000, which have been offered to some of the users, which have been rejected to fund on their own. So currently there isn't anything budgeted that would highlight that a contract operator would be in place, or any sort of $350,000 or $400,000 piece of equipment that would allow for this service. But wanted to highlight that as something critical. For discussion, I'll just highlight the others. One of the other objectives that we identified was a legal reduction strategy and timely lease renewals, as there's ongoing lease reviews and renewals, along with a significant legal burden for some of that support. The suggestion would be that a focus be made to reduce some of that cost of operating the airport. And then another service objective, which I'd really welcome some feedback around for incorporating and strategizing, is an alternative revenue stream review. So currently there's very limited funds other than general taxation that support the airport, and wanted to seek direction or input as to whether that's something that should be pursued or approached differently to offset some of these costs.
My thoughts on it is that we've gone down that road a number of times, and with the oh, sorry, go ahead, Jenny. I didn't see your hand up there. You go first.
No, I put it up after you started talking, Mike. All good. But do you want to go and I'll follow behind you?
We looked at the airport a number of times, and with the Mount Currie slide hazard and those sorts of issues, there's not an easy business model available for it beyond what we're already doing, unless we want to look at other services like increasing our marketing and increasing our filming options or that sort of thing. That would be the only alternate revenue that comes to my mind. The airport services that we provide will continue to grow, I think, in the context that they are now, you know what I mean? But I don't think we could, having seen what we've seen over the past, I don't think we can really broaden our airport activities too much in terms of bringing in new revenue just because of the constraints we have. So that's just my quick thoughts on. Go ahead, Councillor Helmer.
Thanks. I probably my comments aren't that different. I feel like, and correct me if I'm off base here, I feel like the airport has generally cost the village more money than it's brought in for a number of years. And, to carry on in that direction, I feel that we as council and staff need to have a really firm position on, why is that acceptable? And I haven't spent enough time thinking about it, but in my mind, that it's not okay that the taxpayer is supporting the airport. And if I'm correct, and please correct me if I'm off in a different world there. And then also to have on top of that the burden of increased requests for snow clearing and maintenance. At some point I feel we really need to tighten that up and be clear about the purpose of the airport and what the service level expectation is that's reasonable given the size of the village and the tax base that we have to rely on. And to back up what Mike was saying, I feel that the conversations around alternate revenue streams have been happening for sure in the conversations I've participated in for the last number of years. And they don't seem to go anywhere. And not that they don't go anywhere, actually, I should rephrase that. They don't produce the revenue streams maybe that we would hope that they might. And I think at the end of the day, we have the asset that we have, and it is costing a lot of money. So what is it reasonable? What is reasonable for us to be able to offer as a service level? Is where my mind goes to with the airport.
I think for me with the airport, I take a whole different look at it. It's not making any money. So sometimes we put some dollars into it. But if you look at the revenue generated from employment at the airport for the community, in itself, it's just huge. The last time I talked to the airport manager, I think he said he had in excess of 27 full-time people. Now, you take those 27 people and move them out of the community, what does that do to the community for economics? So I think we have to look at it from two different aspects. The people that are out there are providing a lot of employment and a lot of offset jobs that really make a difference in our community, a huge difference. The other thing that I've always talked about, and we've talked about here, Gina's gonna get a little grayer when I bring this up, since 2008, we've always talked about a society or something, letting those people run it themselves. And getting out of the airport management completely. And just saying to them, okay, you know, here's the tax base that we get. You know, we fund a lot of organizations in the community that don't make money. And is this an opportunity to say to them, and we're having that meeting, I think, the end of February or something, with the airport users, is there an option here to take that off the table? Because it's the amount of time and effort that Gina has put in over the years, it's terrible the amount of time we spend on the airport for what we get out of it. So I keep wondering sometime, why don't we just turn that over to a society? And I know it's been tried in the past and hasn't worked. And she just looked at me like, yes, please take it away. But gee, I don't want that to, you know.
I think that it's a lot more complicated too, holding the lease for the property and whether we want to maintain any control over the asset. I think part of it, I think there's some good statements made here, and as we get into the next phase of the budget and go down from 40 to 20,000 feet, I'd be curious to see where our number is at in terms of how much we do fund the airport, what that number looks like. We fund services for the community, for the greater community, you know, and we make that decision, do we get the value we need? So let's see what we're putting into it. I hear everybody's comments at the table. When we bring it down a level, let's see. I mean, I think Councilor Caddick's suggestion of turning it over is a lot more complicated than we might think, and would result in a lot of short-term and mid-term work. But if we, you know, we'll leave that to our airport manager, to Sheena, to fill us in on it.
They're not the airport manager.
They're not the airport manager.
It's gonna work.
I'll leave it to CEO Tracy to fill us in when she fills it.
And so if I may, just to take some of that feedback, and you're correct, it isn't making money. The lease fees and landing fees and so forth aren't offsetting all of the service costs. I guess my question would be, when preparing the budget or the first draft that you'll see, the biggest request that we're hearing from the users, which is on council's radar, is do we include snow removal at a higher degree or not? And I would have a recommendation, if you please, but if you want to see that incorporated or evaluated as an option, we'd be able to do that as well. That in last year's numbers was a $100,000 quote, which would have been a 5% tax increase. That's the order of magnitude that we're roughly looking at here. And I don't know if that's something that the council's amenable looking at, or whether we would exclude that service level change.
So I'm thinking that before we provide too much input on that, we have our meeting with the airport group to hear their input and ask our questions of them.
Okay.
And our staff can help inform us, and then I hesitate jumping into that conversation. I'm not saying no more snow clearing ads, not clearing any of the above. That's why we're having that conversation, and then I want to hear more from airport manager.
Yeah. Both them to the February 28th committee of the whole, would that still work for your timeline and preparation?
I think so. I'll maybe keep the baseline at current service levels and have that option off on the side where.
Would the baseline at this point is
And with the budget process, the best part about really starting at this 40,000 foot level, we've got a lot of runway to incorporate these discussions and changes as well.
If I can just flag, there is some maintenance issues that need to be done around fencing and crack ceiling repairs and that kind of thing. There's grant funding that we've been successful in receiving in the past. And staff's intention this year is to make application for that funding. The program opens in November and closes in January, so it'll be for 2024. But part of that funding does require the municipality to put up 25%. So I think in 2016, when we did that last time we did this work, our 25% came to about $68,000, like that, which was a one-time thing. But it is something that we have to look at incorporating on an every 6 to 7 year period, because the crack ceiling repairs do need to be done, and that leads us to safe and secure airport. So council can expect to see something coming forward next year to accommodate that that work that just has to be done. There's no other way we can get funding, and they did fund it to the tune of about $150,000. So it's if we didn't get that funding, we would be looking at trying to come up with $225,000 to do this work. So it's a really good program, and they're very supportive of small airports. So I just wanted to flag that we do look for grant funding where we can, but there's always that portion that the municipality has to put forward.
So prior to our meeting with them, with the airport users in later February, are you going to provide the committee with some background, costs, some of the?
This is the process of preparing that, and we should receive that probably when we're all the way, but you have it in time.
Perfect.
You have time to look at it.
Awesome.
Great. Last one I'll briefly cover, a shared service with the SLRD operation. So at a high level, the larger service covers everything from the rec center all the way through Dundas Park and a few other areas, but reaching pre-pandemic levels of service is a key objective. Rec center wasn't open in the beginning of 2022, and we're starting to see the restoration there. Meeting expectations of the community on service provision is a big objective as well, and listening to feedback and being available and open, and then providing a higher level of customer service. So this is a really resilient team that's always upgrading their skills and trying to always improve the customer service. So there's a few initiatives underway to do that.
Yeah. Just a quick question about number 2, and this might be included in it. Is there currently a way of measuring how, whether or not we're meeting the expectations of the community, or is that part of the plan is also, like you're saying, is developing metrics by which we measure that? Because I'm mostly curious.
Good question. On one hand, certainly continue to develop metrics is one. I don't know if Christine is on the line, able to answer or supplement that with anything further.
Can we bring her forward, please? Give us a there's a delay. There seems to be a delay these days. Oh, there we go.
We're also investing, it's very low dollars, but to improve the internet and wireless service around here, as everyone's seeing it, it's like really not working. So
Really noticing now that we have more equipment, there's more of a delay in this.
So a little bit budgeted for that. That improves the emergency preparedness in the emergency operations center, and you'll see some trenching in the spring, and the ground is thawed that'll support that.
She's in. Online. She's online.
Christine, can you hear us?
Hi, apologies. I haven't timed this very well because I have a doctor's appointment with my daughter. But to answer Councillor Ramsden's question, we are working on establishing some procedures. for measuring of feedback and things like that at this time. So that would be part of point number 2.
Kind of procedures, and then catch it.
They're working on developing procedures.
Yeah.
Developing a measurement method. Okay. Thank you.
Is there any thought to providing service on Sundays? Because there's a lot of programs in place right now that get bounced around quite a bit and get canceled and other people take the place. So I've heard a lot of feedback about that. So is there something we can do on those issues?
We're working all of those things into the budget as we speak. So we're just waiting for some approvals to take place, and then we'll move forward with Sunday operations, as well as trying to diplomatically manage all of the different demands from the community at this time. I think we've developed some consistency for programming that we've established, some quality attendance with on Saturdays. So we're pretty excited about what we've been able to juggle to date, but you'll see some more consistency moving forward.
And I think, thank you for that, and I appreciate that, because that's the feedback I've been getting, and there's no consistency in programs being at the same hour, the same day on a continual basis. So I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Great, thank you.